Hello, good evening and welcome to Adoption Week Scotland's Understanding FASD. My name's Ali Brown and I'm from FASD Hub Scotland, and I'm chairing and hosting this evening's session. We're just going to give people a few minutes to join the room. It's 2 minutes to 7 and we're due to start at 7 o'clock this evening. So welcome. Please make yourself known if you'd like to say hello or tell us where you're from using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Depending whether you're on a mobile device or on a laptop, that could appear in a slightly different place. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with Zoom sessions, but just in case you're not, we can't hear you, we can't see you, we don't know what you're doing. So if you're still enjoying your tea, great. If you're having to put children to bed or if there's young people still up, that's absolutely fine. We aren't going to be able to hear anything that's happening in your family this evening. As I say, please feel free to use the chat function if you would just like to comment on what's happening. But if you want to ask a specific question to anything that you hear this evening, and in particular, pose something to the panel, which you'll be able to do later on, then please use the Q&A function, which is in the bottom. Again, if you're on a laptop, it's in the bottom of the screen. If you're on a mobile device, it will appear at a different place on your screen. You can use that to submit any question you would like to ask any of the panel members here. And we've got a brilliant panel this evening. I'll be asking them all to introduce themselves shortly. But we will get going now as it is bang on 7 o'clock. So this session is due to finish at 8:30 sharp, and we hope that you'll enjoy everything that we've got to offer you tonight. So as I say, my name's Ali Brown. I'm the project manager for FASD Hub Scotland. I'm delighted to be able to host this evening's conversation around understanding FASD. I've got with me a few colleagues from the Hub who are here in their capacity both as parents of an individual with FASD, but also their capacity and professional roles within the Hub. So I'm just going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves individually, and I'll start in my top left, which is Barbara Ogston.
There you go. My unmute button wasn't working there for a minute. Hi, I'm Barbara. I'm FASD lead in FASD Hub Scotland. I am adoptive parent of 2 children. I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son, and my son has a diagnosis of FASD, and he received his diagnosis a long time ago, so we've been around the FASD community for quite a long time now. And yeah, that's really about me. I'll be presenting in a few minutes, telling you a bit more about FASD, so I might share more with you then.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, and next to me on my right is Jackie Duncan.
Hello everyone, I'm Jackie Duncan. I'm a foster carer. I'm the long-term permanent carer of 3 non-sibling children, one 14-year-old girl who's been with me for 7.5 years, one 11-year-old girl who's been with me for over 4 years now, and an 11-year-old boy who's been within our family for 7.5 years, and he was diagnosed with FASD in April last year.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Jackie. So directly below me, we've got Lindsay Logie.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Logie. I'm a consultant paediatrician. I work in community child health with an interest in developmental presentations in young children. And I work in NHS Lothian over in the east of Scotland, and I was a member of the SIGN guideline group, which is the Scottish guideline group that drew up the guidance around diagnosis of children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
Brilliant, thank you. It's great to have you here this evening, Lindsay. And below Lindsay, we've got Elsa Clark.
Hi folks, my name is Ailsa. I am a teacher. I am an education consultant with specialism in FASD and trauma, and I am one of 2 education advisors who work part-time for FASD Hub at the moment. I'm also the parent to a little boy who's 9 and has a diagnosis of FASD, ASD and ADHD. And I work in schools with kids who have FASD too. So yeah, like most other panel members, 1 foot in the professional camp, 1 foot in the personal camp.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we've got Debbie Gilchrist.
Hi there, I'm Deborah Gilchrist. I was a foster carer, but then became an adopter when I adopted my first foster child, and he was diagnosed with FASD 3 years ago. So he is now 13. So that's why I'm here tonight.
Brilliant, thank you, Debbie. And finally, but not at all least, we've got Eleanor McNamee, and if you'd like to introduce yourself. I was about to say who you were.
Hi everyone, I'm Eleanor McNamee. I'm from St Margaret's Children and Family Care Society. I'm a social worker to trades. I've worked for several years with children and families and in child protection, and I've worked at St Margaret's for the last 7 years. My current role is as Adoption and Social Work Manager. I have a special interest in FASD, and I'm really pleased to be here tonight.
Brilliant, thank you so much, everybody. So as you can see, we've got a panel full of wealth of knowledge and experience. And I should mention as well that I'm also an adoptive parent. I've got 3 adopted children, and my youngest, who is currently 8, has an FASD diagnosis. And one of my other children is going through the assessment process. So lots of us here with lived experience of parenting an individual with FASD. So please feel free to ask those questions. For anybody that's just joined, we were expecting just over 100 people, so that's quite good. We've got 83 currently, and that's about right for what we'd expect. Often things happen in people's lives and they can't always join us. So please use the Q&A if you've got any questions you'd like to pose as we go along this evening, and the chat function if you just want to comment on what's being said. If you are on social media and you use Twitter, then please feel free to share any quotes or comments about this evening, and we'd be delighted if you could use the hashtag AWS Adoption Week Scotland 2021. Okay, so without further ado, we'll kick off. I'm going to just tell you a little bit now about FASD Hub Scotland. Hopefully the technology is all going to work, and I shall share my screen with you. So she says as I press the wrong thing straight away. Right. Great. So FASD Hub Scotland is a part of Adoption UK and linked to the Scotland office. And we offer a tiered support service for all parents and carers. So you don't have to be an adoptive parent to use our service. Biological parents, kinship carers, foster carers, and adoptive parents, all welcome at FASD Hub Scotland. We don't require you to have an FASD diagnosis or your child. Child, young person, young adult, that's absolutely fine, with a history of prenatal alcohol exposure. We were launched in June of 2019 and funded by the Scottish Government, and as I say, hosted and run by Adoption UK in Scotland. Our service is a tiered service, so that means that people can engage and interact with our service at the point that most suits them. And just on the slide here, we've got our 3 different tiers of that service. So our helpline is really open to anybody. You can ring that Tuesday to Friday from 10 till 2:30 p.m. And we offer a lot of online resources as well through our website and what we share through our social media. So all of that really fits together into our tier 1. In our tier 2, it's where we provide our more one-to-one direct support to parents, carers, through our peer support, through our one-to-one parent partnering scheme, through our training workshops, which are open to parents, carers, and professionals. And we also run 2 peer support groups, one for parents and carers and one for adults with FASD. And we're really grateful to be able to work with an adult with FASD who helps us monitor and moderate the adults group. And fortunately, she's not with us this evening, but we're grateful that Carol is part of this in a voluntary capacity as well. And then we have our tier 3, which is really our therapeutic service. And this is where some of the parents that come through our one-to-one family support can access some additional things, such as counselling or a session around their parenting with a clinical psychologist. We've also been able to put over 25 young people through therapeutic surfing in the last year, working with the WAVE project. based in St Andrews, and also in Dunbar. So we use that in an innovative way. So we really feel that this service enables people to, as I say, engage at a point that best suits them, and that you don't have to stay in one part of that. You can move between it. So it really meets individuals' needs. Other activities that we do, we run the Scottish FASD Network, which is a collaboration between other organisations within Scotland who support families and young people, young adults with FASD. That could be completely within their title, and very obvious, like FASD Hub Scotland, or it could be another organisation such as Sleep Scotland, who have people that would use their service but aren't necessarily going to them because it's FASD, but that would be a consideration. So that's a group that is chaired by Professor Moira Plant and meets on a quarterly basis. We also work really collaboratively with the FASD Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Advisory Support Team, known as the FASD team, who are really the clinical leads within Scotland, commissioned by the Scottish Government to support clinical colleagues throughout the country. And they're based at Edinburgh University. Some people refer to them as the Ayrshire team because that is where they used to be based, but now at Edinburgh University. We're also involved in research by supporting PhD research students. We are directly involved with a student from Strathclyde and also support a student from Edinburgh University as well in their research. We obviously do things like FASD Awareness Month, things like today, part of Adoption Week Scotland, supporting our colleagues in the Kinship Care Service during Kinship Care Week. If you've ever been to one of our webinars before, you'll know that we frequently run them throughout the year and quite often run a Wednesday webinar. So they're worth looking out for. Come the new year, we're going to have some great new guests on those once a month. We obviously do online presentations, workshops, and have newsletters as well. We have a fantastic new website where you can find a range of resources. It's a really easy website to remember, FASD Hub.Scot. So please nip on over there, not right now, after this evening's session, and see what you can find. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavour of who we are, FASD Hub Scotland, and what we can offer and support parents with. I will just stop sharing my screen now so that we can get back to Barbara, who is going to join us and give you a little bit of an introduction about FASD.
Thanks, Ellie. Just give me a moment. I'll now put my screen share on. Right, hopefully you can see that okay. So yeah, it's great. So what I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking a little bit about some of the basic facts around FASD. And we'll start off with this definition of FASD, which comes from Canada, from Can FASD. And Canada are very much at the forefront of FASD research and diagnosis and support. And we really like this definition, so we use it a lot. So FASD stands for Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. It's a lifelong disability that affects the brain and body of people who were exposed to alcohol in the womb. Each person with FASD has both strengths and challenges, and will need special support to help them succeed with many different parts of their daily lives. So we're going to be talking tonight over the next hour or so about some of the challenges that individuals, children, young people and adults who have FASD might have, but we also hope that you'll get a sense of how much our children and young people can achieve as well when they are given the right kind of support. So I have some more basic information and some statistics to share with you. So the key facts: FASD is caused by prenatal alcohol exposure, or sometimes we refer to that as PAE. And alcohol is what's known as a teratogen or a poison. And a teratogen is a substance that can cross the placenta and can cause damage to brain cells and the central nervous system. Because alcohol is water soluble, when it's consumed during pregnancy, it passes freely from the mother's bloodstream through the placenta into the fetal bloodstream. And because the fetus doesn't have a fully developed liver, it's not able to filter out the toxins from the alcohol. So the alcohol circulates in the fetus's bloodstream, and that can cause harm at any point of the 9 months of pregnancy. Alcohol is also broken down more slowly in a baby than it is in an adult. It stays in the fetus's body for longer. So some such studies suggest that it can take up to 24 hours longer for alcohol molecules to leave the body of a fetus than that of its mother. So you can imagine there's quite a lot of scope and time there in which harm could occur. FASD is the most common known neurodevelopmental condition in the Western world. It may be in the entire world, but we don't have the research to back that up. But it is certainly not by any means a rare condition. And neurodevelopmental means brain-based. There's no cure for FASD. It is a lifelong condition. And it's thought to affect between about 3 to 5% of the general population. So that's round about 1 in 20 people. And if you compare that to conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, that affects about 1 in 96 people. So FASD is certainly not a rare condition at all, but it's certainly one that not many people have heard of and not enough people know about. No two individuals on the spectrum have the same spiky profile, and I'll speak in a few minutes about what we mean by the spiky profile. Everybody is different, very much so. FASD is a whole body condition. It can affect any part of the body or brain. An individual might have difficulties with certain areas of their brain. They might struggle with certain tasks or environments. They might be slow to meet the milestones. There's around about 426 comorbidities associated with FASD. It really can affect any part of an individual. And it's often called a hidden disability or an invisible disability, because generally you can't tell by looking at someone if they have FASD. Now, there are some facial features associated with FASD. These are a thin upper lip, a smooth philtrum, which is a little groove in between your nose and your lip, and narrow eye openings. However, only about 10% of individuals with FASD have those facial features. There's a very small window of pregnancy, around about day 19 to 22, in which the facial features develop. So it's a very small window that the alcohol would cause that kind of harm to a developing fetus. So it's very much a hidden disability. You can't tell if somebody has it by looking at them. And how alcohol affects an individual has lots to do with the amount of alcohol consumed, the stage of pregnancy. But what we do know is that there's no known safe amount of alcohol or time during pregnancy to consume alcohol. So that's why there's a clear no alcohol, no risk message from all the chief medical officers from across the UK. So they advise that if you're pregnant or you're planning a pregnancy, the safest approach is not to drink alcohol. Individuals with FASD often face many challenges throughout their lives. However, with early diagnosis and the right support and intervention, then individuals can thrive and they can be successful. And we'll share some of the successes of individuals with FASD later on. Now, I know you all have a particular interest tonight in care experienced children, perhaps children who are adopted or going to be adopted. So while FASD might affect anyone who is exposed to alcohol in utero, some groups are disproportionately affected. And one of these groups is children and young people who have been taken into care, where there is sadly a higher likelihood of prenatal alcohol exposure. So some research from Peterborough in 2015 revealed that 75% of children who were put forward for an adoption medical had prenatal alcohol exposure noted in their medicals. Now, that doesn't mean that 75% of children had FASD. It means that 75% were at risk of FASD because of prenatal alcohol exposure. The same study, when you take into account all care experienced children, so that's adopted, fostered, kinship, about 34% of care experienced children had a history of prenatal alcohol exposure. And it's thought that care experienced children and young people could be up to 4 times as likely to have FASD as the general population. So although certainly not all care experienced children would have FASD, it does become part of the picture for many adoptive, kinship and fostering families. So I'm just going to take you through briefly some of the common challenges for people with FASD. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, and certainly no individual would have difficulties in all of these areas. Everybody is different. So common challenges include attention and memory. Memory, particularly the language memory, might be weak. They might need constant repetition and reminders. They might learn information and then lose it again or seem to have forgotten it. And sometimes that can be quite hard to spot as well, because children learn really quickly how to copy their peers and how to mask. A lot of children with FASD also have a diagnosis of ADHD, and there's a big overlap in between the symptoms, particularly in regards to executive functioning skills. So hyperactive behaviour and difficulties with concentration are quite common challenges. A lot of children and young people struggle with abstract concepts. So if they're in school, maybe they might be good at counting, but when they're transferring those counting skills and number skills into an abstract concept, for example, time or money, then they might struggle with that. So to give you an example, my 13-year-old son is still learning to tell the time at the moment. And it's a sort of constant conversation with him about what the time is, because he's always interested to know. I think he's usually trying to work out when food is next coming. But if I say to him, if he asks me what the time is, and I say it's 7:30, that means nothing to him at all. And he'll say, but what does that mean? And I need to think, it's 7:30. And it's the same if I said 6:15, it means nothing to him. I have to say 6:15. And that's just the stage that he's at the moment, trying to understand this abstract concept of telling the time. Social skills is another big area which a lot of individuals struggle with. You might find that children play with children much younger than their own age. A lot of the kind of symptoms of FASD really become noticeable between the ages of about 8 and 12. And that tends to be when people begin to get concerned, because they notice that maybe a child isn't interacting or functioning at the age the stage that you would be expecting them to be for their chronological age. So social skills, sharing, understanding the game, the rules of the game, being able to read body language, that can all be quite challenging. So can planning and problem solving skills as well. So this is the kind of executive functioning skills that take place at the front of our brain. So it's the working out what steps need to be taken in order to complete a task. It's planning the day, planning anything, planning, are you going to put your shoes on before you put your socks on? It can be very basic things like that. Planning and problem solving skills. Executive functioning skills are really very much commonplace among individuals with FASD and having challenges. They might struggle to learn from consequences. So it might be really frustrating for you if they do something and then they do it again. Maybe it's something that's maybe a risky behaviour and they didn't learn the first time. That's not a good idea. That's a lot to do with the fact that their brains are just wired differently, and making those connections can be much more challenging. Individuals might struggle with judgment skills, so using the information that they have around them to be able to come to an appropriate conclusion or decision. So my son saw a dog that had a tag around its neck that said vet. So he says, right, so that dog is a vet. Like, well, no, he's not thinking that dog hasn't got a job, that dog's not been to university, that dog doesn't look like it knows much how to work, it looks like it just sleeps all day. But to him, he just used the information that he had, and the tag said vet, so the dog is a vet. A lot of children, young people struggle with impulse control, and that can be demonstrated in many different ways. It may be through eating, it may be through touching things, it may be hitting out or hurting people. It can come out in lots of different ways. And it's something very, very difficult to support individuals to overcome as well, because it's so much part of who they are. Individuals might struggle with auditory processing. You might be doing that yourself at the moment, listening to me. But if you said to an individual, perhaps, go to the toilet, put your shoes on, line up at the door, we're going outside to play, you might find that they line up at the door, but they haven't done the first 2 steps because they've just been given too much information to process. And cognitive fatigue, that's just the exhaustion, just from trying to sit still in the classroom, from listening to what's going on, to trying to think, trying to concentrate. That's all really, really exhausting when you're having to fight with every part of your being to not give in to your impulses, or just trying to concentrate when it's something that your brain really struggles to do. Many individuals have problems with sleeping, and maybe not sleeping as much as they should. It's maybe because they lack an internal body clock. They may not differentiate between night and day. They might not realise that nighttime means sleep time, or they may struggle with the concept of time, because again, that's the abstract concept. And some individuals, particularly younger children, might have difficulty with eating, sensitive gag reflex, and things like that. Emotional regulation, I'm sure you can work out what that is, but it's just being able to use appropriate emotions for the situation in which they're in, and being able to have some control over those emotions as well. That can be really challenging. Motor skills and mobility may have difficulty with fine motor skills, using scissors, using a pencil, or large motor skills. Like my son had a poor muscle tone in his legs. So he had splints and plaster casts and eventually Botox. So he was able to bring his heel down and walk. He was very much a toe walker. So motor skills is something to look out for as well. Sensory processing is huge, huge area. Some individuals are sensory seekers, so they like to touch everything, put everything in their mouth, and just really, really like the messy play, kind of playing in mud, water, whatever they can do. And some individuals are more adverse to sensory experiences, so they want to avoid maybe colourful rooms or loud noises, or certain textures, even of textures of food. Sensory processing can go both ways, but it is a very common challenge for individuals. And finally, communication, receptive and expressive. We need to be careful when we're talking to individuals with FASD about the kind of language that we use. If I said to you, oh, go and get on your bike, you know what I would mean. I didn't literally mean on your bike. But to an individual with FASD, they might be thinking, right, where is my bike? I'll get on it and I'll go. We'll be very careful about how they understand language as well. And this is what we mean by the spiky profile that I mentioned earlier on. If you take one thing away from tonight and your knowledge of FASD, then this I would say is a really key concept for you to be aware of. If you imagine you had an 18-year-old, they might have an expressive language development age of 20. Perhaps a reading ability of a 16-year-old, but you know, that's okay. You can get by reading it as a 16-year-old. However, their living skills might be down at age 11. Maybe money and time might be down at age 8. Social skills might only be down at age 7, and comprehension and social maturity could be down at age 6. And if you think about what you'd be expecting an 18-year-old to be doing, maybe going on the bus themselves, maybe heading off to college or to a job, maybe being able to go to the shops, wander around the town by themselves, you'd have to consider if that was appropriate for them, if they maybe weren't functioning at that age of 18. So it's really important that we consider an individual's developmental age and not their chronological age. We need to meet people with FASD where they are. We always need to think stage and not age. Now, as individuals grow older, particularly into the later teens and young adulthood, there are some associated difficulties which have been identified that they may experience. So these include social difficulties in relating to their peers, poor mental health, they may have inappropriate sexualised behaviour, they may have challenges with independent living, they may become a vulnerable adult. And none of these things are absolutely guaranteed that that's what's going to happen, because we also know that with the right support, then individuals with FASD can succeed and can do really well. But what's really important is that we adjust our expectations for individuals to consider their developmental age rather than their chronological age. And just to finish, I know I've said a lot of challenges there that individuals face, but I think it's also important that we recognise that our children, young people, adults with FASD are amazing and they can achieve great things. They have many strengths. These are just some examples of some of the strengths. They might have great points of insight, really determined, persistent, helpful. They can be really bright and intelligent. They can be non-judgmental. Every day is a new day. And they can be really good with younger children and animals as well. And what's really important in order to support individuals is identifying what those strengths are and building a strength profile for them. So that's really a kind of whirlwind tour of the basics of what FASD is. I'm just going to share a couple more things with you before I hand back to the panel. The first is just to let you know a little bit about the resources that we have available, and Ali's already pointed you in the direction of our website. But I really would encourage you to have a look at FASDHub.Scot. There you'll find lots of fact sheets about what is FASD. There's also a fact sheet on there for prospective adopters and foster carers. So if you are looking to adopt or foster, then we can pop a link in the chat to our fact sheets. And we also have one for kinship carers. We have a brand new one all about FASD and vision and sight. And there's lots more things on our website as well. Resources for talking to children about FASD, lots of links to other things that we like. Our webinars are on our YouTube channel, and lots of information there. But we'll put some information in the links for you. Now, before I hand back to the panel, I'd like to share one more thing with you, and this is something that we are incredibly proud of. This is our FASD animation, which came out in September as part of FASD month. And we brought together a group of young people and adults with FASD, and they helped us to produce an animation. And so far it's had around about 52,000 views, which is just incredible. And we are just really, really proud of all the work that everybody has put into creating this animation. It's about 5 minutes long, and we can put a link in the chat so you can watch it again and share it, because I'm sure you will want to share it. There's lots of information in there for you. It's aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds. It's one of these ones, like all the best movies. It works at different levels, so there's lots of information in there about FASD as well. So I'll play that for you. And if the sound doesn't work, then somebody will give me a shout, but it should work. So here.
It's really early in the morning. Mom and Dad are still asleep, but because of my FASD, my brain is always busy, and I'm already wide awake. Mom and Dad have made a planner for my day. I find it easier if I know what's happening and when. 8 o'clock means breakfast. Jam on toast is my favourite. I love the crunchy feeling of the burnt toast between my teeth. Mom and Dad know all about FASD. So does my auntie. She's having a baby. She isn't drinking any alcohol while pregnant, making sure my new cousin is as safe as possible. Doctors now know that it is not safe to drink alcohol at any time when pregnant. Mum says it's not always been that way. Lots of people still don't realise how dangerous alcohol can be to an unborn baby. Secondary school is a lot different to primary. Instead of one classroom, I've got 7 in one day. There are so many more people to get to know and things to remember. I hope everyone likes me. Sometimes it's too much at once. I feel much better now. Today I get to tell my class about FASD and why I think differently about the world around me. It's not just me, it could be as many as 1 in 20 people. It's more common than autism and ADHD. People need to think differently like I do. When people with FASD like me are supported by family, professionals and friends like you, then we can achieve great things. I like giving presentations and talking, though I'm not always so confident with maths. It sometimes helps to work things out in a different way. Thanks, Juliet. After school, I visit my friends at our FASD community group. We all have FASD, but we're each unique. Alfie and I love adventures. We like the way going high on the swing makes us feel all whizzy. Anna is very kind to animals. Sometimes she needs a reminder to be gentle. Alyssa is really musical. She loves the vibrations of the drum. Sometimes she plays too loud for me, but that's okay. I like dancing. After seeing my friends, I am starving. Hurry up, Dad. 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 Dad, I'm hungry. After a long day, I'm tired and my brain feels all fuzzy. But my family understands that my brain works differently. They know how to help me. I play my baby cousin a lullaby before bed. I can't wait to meet her. I have strengths and talents, and there is lots more to me than my FASD. But my FASD can often make life tricky, confusing and frustrating when those around me don't understand why I think differently. When they think differently, life is much easier. My FASD makes me, me.
So I hope you all enjoyed that, and please share it with everybody because we think there's some really good messages in there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll hand back to Ali. It's not letting me, not sure. There we go. Right, we'll be back. Here's everybody coming. I never get bored watching that. I could watch it every day. I just about do watch it every day. Right, I think we've lost Ali, have we? Ali's having problems. Oh dear. Okay, right. So I'll see if we can, let's have a chat while we're waiting for Ali to come back. Oh dear, I'm just getting messages here. Oh dear, okay, right. Let's see if we can get the questions started then. Let's have a little look in the Q&A and see where we are. So mentioned at the start about motor skills and walking on toes. My 12-year-old does this all the time. Is there more information on that? Lindsay, is that maybe something that you maybe know about?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, tiptoe walking is as you described, Barbara. It's quite common in children, and they can get very tight tendons at the back of the heels. If it becomes a habit over time, they can get very tight tendons. So it's seen with a lot of neurodevelopmental conditions, and it is quite often about tone and habit and all the rest of it. So it can be something that you see with FASD, and it's also something you see with other conditions. So if you're concerned, the people to be involved with that, often we would ask our physiotherapist to give exercises as the first port of call, and trying to talk about sturdy shoes, which sounds very unglamorous, that kind of thing. But it's unusual. You were saying that your own son had to have an operation, is that right?
No, he had splints and then plaster casts and then Botox, 2 rounds of Botox injections.
Okay, yeah. So that to have that level is actually quite unusual, but actually that's not the same as an operation. Sorry, I was mishearing you, but yeah. Botox is actually really great now, and it can make a huge difference with splinting and all the rest of it.
Yeah, no, it was amazing the difference that it made after the second round. Good. Ali's back with us, Ali.
Thank you, everyone. That has to be the chairperson's worst nightmare when you see this blue screen of death on your laptop. Not good. Thank you, everyone, for carrying on, though. I understand that you were answering the questions from the Q&A.
Yes, we were. Just answered one question. You're back just in time.
Perfect. So were we on question 2?
Yeah, I've the answered ones, I've moved it to answer. So everything you can see has not been answered yet.
All right. Okay, great. Thanks, Barbara. So there was some, thank you for everyone that submitted questions before this evening as well. And we've sort of grouped those together. So maybe we could come to the first set, which is around diagnosis. And the first question was around what is the best way to look out for the signs around getting a diagnosis in Scotland. So I wonder if I could ask Lindsay maybe first of all to answer that question with your sign knowledge, but with your paediatrician hat on as well.
So I think it was really helpful to hear the how children with FASD present from Barbara, and I think it's really important to know that if you've got concerns, or if your child's got concerns about how they are, those are things that you can seek for further assessment. And actually, interestingly enough, and I'm sorry about the people who I think are coming in from England, Scotland's looking at a sort of Scottish-wide neurodevelopmental pathway for all young people, children presenting with difficulties that may affect how their development or their emotions or their behaviour. And so, although I know one of the questions on the Q&A said we don't have a service in our area, there will be a neurodevelopmental service. So it's remembering that even if you think it's due to alcohol, you still should be able to have access to somebody in community paediatrics or developmental paediatrics for a further assessment of what the difficulties are, what the strengths are, and have a think about what that child's profile is like. The issue, I suppose, might be in getting that assessment at the moment is that there have always been waiting lists in the health service, and actually I think post-pandemic there's I know that for our own service, our waiting lists were before we always kept within targets, so the NHS you're meant to be seen within 3 months. I know for a fact that now it's more likely 6 months. So there is a wait involved. So if you think you have a concern and you want a referral, ask your GP or ask your school. It depends on the way your service is set up in your area, but be prepared to know that there will possibly be a wait, but often services are gathering information while you're waiting and thinking of ways to get support through nursery and school is still what we call GIRFIC principles. And I don't know if people in Scotland have heard of that, but it's about getting it right for every child. So every child, if there's a concern, all the professionals around that child, be it a school teacher, be it a nursery teacher, be it your health visitor, has a duty and a responsibility to sort of provide support, even if we don't know what the diagnosis is at that stage. Has that answered that question? I've lost myself as I've chatted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. I think as well that people can often do things like seeker speech and language assessment. You can often self-refer for that, and that would be part that would feed into an FASD diagnosis. So something that you can actively do as a parent. And equally, if you're able to see a paediatrician, then they can do things like eyesight, hearing, some of those things that maybe have got less waiting time. And as Lindsay says, unfortunately, we're all really aware that CAMS in particular, which is needed for the neurodevelopmental elements of the assessment, are overstretched in nearly every area. I don't think there'd be any area of Scotland, and at least, but I'm sure that's true of the whole of the UK. So yeah, unless anybody else from the panel's got anything they were burningly wanting to add to that, I think we can move on from that question. Is that okay with the panel? Yeah, just checking. So with an interesting question here about what are the benefits of an FASD diagnosis. And I wonder if we could maybe come to Debbie from a parent point of view, and perhaps Elsa from an education point of view, first of all.
I was going to say, from a parent point of view, when you have that diagnosis, mine's unfortunately came about later than anticipated. I had been his foster carer, and it wasn't until I actually went for an ADHD diagnosis that it then was discovered that he had FASD in his notes that had never been mentioned. So I was a bit late to that, but when we had that diagnosis, a lot of things suddenly made sense. A lot of the challenges that obviously Barbara covered tonight, you were almost able to tick off. You could just see the list of things. And of course, that then meant I was then able to inform everybody dealing with my child that actually this was what he had. And obviously, as well as the ADHD diagnosis that he went on to receive. And it just meant that I had something that I could take to people. Obviously was able to apply for disability living allowance as a result of that. So financially, it meant that we were able to apply even for a blue badge, because my boy will just run. So actually being able to park right next to places so that he is not going through a car park, so that he is right next to things like that. So having that diagnosis meant that we could suddenly learn more about it. And obviously, as his parents, that's what we've gone on to do, which has really helped us in being able to understand what FASD is and obviously come up with different strategies.
Brilliant, thank you so much. That was a great answer. And Elsa, from a educator's point of view, what are the benefits of a diagnosis?
Yeah, I'm going to be one foot in each camp again as well. Sorry, Ali.
No, that's fine.
Our son had his diagnosis before he started primary school, which meant that not only could we educate ourselves, but we also had protection of the Disability Discrimination Act and the Equalities Act. We could apply for coordinated support plans. We could apply for audit hours. We could push the idea of one-to-one support. We got occupational therapy involved. We got speech and language involved through the school. We got the educational psychologist involved through the school. And he went into primary one with the staff understanding that this was a brain injury. It was a neurodivergence. It wasn't poor behaviour. And they accepted that his behaviour was communication, that something was wrong in the environment. And that meant that education for him was a wholly positive experience, and continues, touch wood, to be a wholly positive experience, and he's in primary 4 now. So that early diagnosis and that early intervention is crucial. Not only that, but it means that the school staff are educated in FASD and they're earmarking other children as potentially being at risk. They are more trauma informed, they're more therapeutic in their practice, and that cascades to their colleagues in other schools and gradually starts to a kind of culture shift in awareness. A lot of people will tell you there's no point in diagnosis because there's very little support, but unless we have more people being diagnosed, there's no data. And if there's no data, there's no need for support. And particularly when services are stretched, we really need to make the case. So diagnosis is crucial in building healthy self-esteem, in the children being adequately supported in the learning environment, and educating professionals and educating their peers. It's wonderful, the benefit of an early diagnosis and appropriate intervention.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And that's been found as well through plenty of research now to show that early intervention is the key for this, and part of that's the diagnosis, but not all of it. I'm just wondering, from Eleanor, from your perspective, when you're placing children, and we've had some questions around information that people might have received. Did we get all of the information? That's often something that is discussed, but I'm just wondering from your perspective, what you feel are the benefits of a diagnosis.
Yeah, so I think that it's a really, it's an important topic about thinking about what information we have at those early stages of linking, of matching, when prospective adopters are, initially reading reports and reading information on a child or children. It's really important to be able to have a forward-thinking approach. And I suppose good practice within social work would be about making sure that evidence was very clearly recorded for that child, because we know how significant that can be then in terms of that diagnostic pathway. And as you've just explained really clearly, Ilse, the benefits of early diagnosis for children. So I think that in terms of what's now known, and certainly what's known now, maybe in comparison to a few years back in the social work world, it's just there's far more awareness, there's far more information available to allow practitioners to understand the significance of really exploring how they can record evidence at those early stages. For example, we talk about the importance of asking a birth parent, asking a birth mother if she, has used alcohol. And obviously that you might not always get that information, but I think it's about thinking creatively about the timing of those conversations, how to approach that as a practitioner in a non-judgmental way, and think about explaining to birth parents how having an accurate picture of what the alcohol use may or may not have been during the pregnancy, just how significant that can be for that child later in life, and for that family who will be their forever family through adoption. So I think it's really just about bringing that awareness to the forefront in social work. And just echoing what you've said there, it really makes sense about how valuable that earlier diagnosis could be, for the whole kind of trajectory of support.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you really touch on a important point there around the prenatal alcohol exposure evidence, which is needed as part of the diagnostic process. And I think for adoptive parents, it's often because it's later on, it can be, years after a child has come to live in your family, you're then seeking that. So as a kind of practical thing for anybody starting out on this journey, is to gather together all of the information you have about your child, all of that written documentation, but your observations as well, sort of looking at those characteristics that Barbara talked us through, and documenting that so that when you're speaking to somebody, you're able to give them really clear examples of what's happening in your family home, and why you think this is as a result of PAE. So we had some questions which were around education. So I'm going to ask Elsa to answer some of these, but also I think it would be great if parents are able to bring in their experience as well. So Jackie and Debbie. So there's a question around what strategies can you put in place within education setting to support an individual with FASD? That's a huge question, and we have a whole course that you can join Elsa and her colleague Lorna on if you are an educator to find out the true answer to that. So I'm not going to ask her to regurgitate the whole 3 hours of that, but just really briefly, some really simple strategies, please, Elsa, that people could put in place.
I think that my top four actually, would be sensory environment, cognitive fatigue and processing time. So if you bear in mind these, sensory environment is a good starting point, because schools can be very overwhelming to people, particularly if they are hypersensitive, if they're oversensitive to noise, to visual distraction. So make sure that you have a safe space or a quiet space for that child. If they do tend to get overstimulated, keep activities quite short. A sensory box, they'll have sensory preferences. It might be that they like fiddling with certain things, or lots of fidget toys. It might be that they like colouring as a calming activity. So have a sensory box that will help them to regulate. So you can actually have that that break and that safe space away from the kind of hubbub of the classroom or the school day. Their processing time is going to be slower, so you adjust your expectations accordingly. Now, not a lot of people with FASD have a low IQ. They usually have an IQ within the normal range, but they will take longer to complete tasks. They will probably need visual aids to complete tasks as well. A lot of them are visual learners, and that particularly helps them with abstract things if they can see a visual representation of it. Cognitive fatigue, they will get tired far more easily because they have to use their brains far harder than a neurotypical child. So provide breaks, provide movement breaks. If you've got some input from occupational therapy about what kind of work they like in terms of movement, my little boy likes heavy work. Which makes it sound as if he should be in a chain gang somewhere, but like weighted backpacks, carrying heavy things, pushing walls away. They need to move with purpose. You need to take it at their speed, and keep your verbal instructions to a minimum, because they have a very narrow bandwidth in working memory, and if they're trying to concentrate on your verbal instructions, then they'll have less working memory to actually complete the task. There's loads and loads of other stuff, and there's fact sheets on the website, but that's a good starter for 10.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Elsa. And as Elsa mentioned, we have 6 fantastic education specific fact sheets on our website, and I'm sure the link will be able to be popped into that area. So from a parenting point of view, Jackie, come to you first of all. What things that school have done have made things better for your child, for your son?
I believe that I think relationship and communication between yourself and the school firstly is really key. You know, we know our children, we know we often know their triggers, and we often know the solutions sometimes in working with you know, the teacher and the head teacher together to sometimes solve what's happening in school. Like Ilse said, noise is a problem. Transitions are so difficult for some of our children, and that can be transitions from actually going from a car to the school, from coming from the school out to the car at the end of the day, and even going from one topic to another. My foster son can get quite into what he's doing, and he'll find it really difficult to stop. So he needs some warnings, like in 5 minutes time you will be, and also just support with social and emotional, you know, with friendships, because they often find that difficult too.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Debbie, I'm just wondering if you've had anything else that you wanted to add there in relation to school.
Well, my son's just moved the big transition from primary up to secondary, and so that was massive because obviously due to COVID he wasn't able to go in and go round and be acclimatized and meet teachers, so he literally turned up. He saw the building, but he literally turned up on the first day with everything being new, but the transition has been made so much easier, and again, as Jackie said, it is communication and building relationship with. So I have his guidance teacher who I have formed this marvelous relationship with, and I feed through her into all his teachers, and I sent with him. I didn't want to assume that people knew about FASD or didn't know about it, so I gave a kind of brief of what it was, but then actually went into detail, all about my boy, and told them how FASD affects him, so that even if teachers have already experienced a child with FASD, it's not necessarily going to be the same as my boy. So being able to give them, it's kind of like the top tips, how to help him, what it will look like if he's not coping, not managing, and just being able to share with them. And I am incredibly fortunate that each week we phone each other and she'll tell me what she's seeing and I can tell her what I'm seeing, because my boy doesn't always communicate. So it's really important that I can keep in touch with the school as to what's happening. And equally, she will say to me, can you tell me what he is, what he's thinking or feeling or feedback, this happened or that happened. And so it's been able to share with him and just know that he's being supported at school and at home, and just so that we just have this one message between us to try and really help him. Primary school for him was not the best, and unfortunately I'm not going to, but I could share what happens when a child is not supported, and but he is now being more supported, which is fantastic. And I'm beginning to see his confidence come back. And I absolutely agree, the earlier the diagnosis, the better, because they really do need support. And without that, they do start to deteriorate. And I've seen that without the lack of support. So it really is critical that you get as many people on board as possible.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'm going to move on now and change tack completely and move us away from education and to a set of questions which were around parenting and sort of supporting that. We often recognise that there can be challenging behaviour for our individuals with FASD, but for those living with them, caring for them, supporting them. So I'm going to ask Barbara if she could first of all answer this one, which is therapeutic parenting the best model to use for an individual with FASD?
It's a tricky question. So I think when you go to being a doctor, they tell you that parenting is a different kind of parenting that you do when you're an adoptive parent. And therapeutic parenting is a really good approach to supporting adoptive children. I think when you also have a child who has FASD, then that's another different kind of parenting as well. And there's a lot in therapeutic parenting that really helps our individuals with FASD, but there's maybe a little bit more, a little bit different that's needed as well. Just taking into account the fact that the brain is just wired differently. It's a neurodevelopmental condition. It is a disability that these individuals have. So in that sense, you do need to parent differently. But there is a lot of really good ideas in therapeutic parenting as well. But therapeutic parenting plus is probably what I would say. Do your research and read up about FASD as well and see how the two match together, because there is an overlap. But yeah.
Absolutely. And what would that plus be? Because that's actually our next question, is what other things would you consider alongside therapeutic parenting? Elsa wants to say something, go for it.
Therapeutic parenting is certain. We were talking about this last night because our lives as parents are so exciting that when our child goes to bed, we talk about therapeutic parenting. I am a greater advocate than I would say than Mr. Clark is, but he was saying it is the most effective tool in the toolbox. But the plus bit comes in from the fact that therapeutic parenting, there's a lot of natural consequences and learning from natural consequences. And obviously our children have to repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat before they learn. So that's where the plus comes in. You cannot expect them to learn from consequences the same way that neurotypical children or children who have trauma but don't have FASD will learn a bit faster. And the other thing we find with our little boy, and this comes with a caveat that all children with FASD are different, we need very, very clear and firm boundaries with him. And that seems to run counter sometimes, but in actual fact it doesn't. So for example, at the moment, he has been having a lot of dysregulated behaviour around little things like needing to take lids off, needing to turn taps on and off, needing to hang things up, you know, and he would spiral out of control. And until it got to the stage where we said, that's a mum and dad job. You don't do that. Because he couldn't deal with the fact that he could do it sometimes and not others. And in actual fact, that sounds like us being very harsh and dictatorial. But that's exactly what he needs in order for his anxiety level to go down. So there is the therapeutic parenting, but when you know your kids and you know their triggers and you know their anxieties, putting that really firm boundary in place, which maybe seems a bit draconian to other people, can actually help them. So it's a weird mix of stuff. It really
Yes,
is.
we could call that an accommodation, couldn't we? You're like accommodating to what you know he's able and capable to be able to take on without getting, like, say, hyper aroused, and then the anxiety comes in, and then other behaviors which are just symptoms of the fact that he's communicating. I think you said it yourself, you know, that communication is a language, and so yeah, what, you know, what's happening is coming out. So yeah, great, thank you very much for that. There was a very specific question, so I meant to say earlier, thank you those that are submitted, and some people, you know, were really quite shared with us some personal information, but obviously we're not wanting to share that. And there was a very specific question about pathological demand avoidance and ways of dissolving and de-escalating. And often we've found, as we've supported parents and carers, that some individuals who maybe would get an FASD diagnosis have ended up with a PDA diagnosis. I'm just wondering whether, Lindsay, from a diagnostic point of view, you have anything that you want to add there around why we might see that, first of all.
Well, that's going to be a hard one for me, I have to say. So I'm one of the autism specialists in West Lothian, and I was in fact doing an autism clinic today. And so my own training and my own assessment, and I'm happy to learn differently, is that we don't make a separate diagnosis of PDA. Having said that, there are children who I see with autism who they just will not do anything at all that is asked of them. And so I see it as a part and parcel of the spectrum of autism, and therefore also part and parcel, because autism and FASD, there's so much overlap, part and parcel of that as well. What was the question now? I've forgotten already. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get at, was the fact that this is likely to be mixed in with something else that's going on rather than a standalone thing by itself.
Yeah.
And I think the ways of dissolving, de-escalation, and is really, as Elsa has described there, it's about the accommodation. It's you knowing your child, isn't it? It's having that relationship, thinking from a neurodevelopmental perspective, which is what we would teach in our parent carer kind of strategies courses, around using, you know, thinking brain first, thinking, you know, how is this being processed, thinking younger, because as we saw in that spiky profile that Barbara shared with us, somebody at 18 isn't operating at every kind of part of their life as an 18-year-old. Some bits could be older, some bits could be younger. So thinking about all of that. And unfortunately, there isn't one magic wand or one, you know, one thing you could say, oh, well, if you try this, then that's definitely going to work, because everyone's an individual. We're all experiencing the world in a totally different way. We're all in different families. And so therefore, you know, yeah, that it's maybe not the answer that people want, but I think it's probably the truthful one. So we've got a question here, which is, what have you found to be the best way to support children in relation to impulsivity and compulsive behaviours? So I'm wondering, who would like to answer that? Go for it.
Being 2 steps ahead of them. Constant supervision. Knowing them so well that you know what they're going to do before they've even thought about doing it, which is a benefit to your processing speed being slightly faster than theirs, although they can move like greased lightning when they want to. It's knowing your kids, and always this constant state of hypervigilance that you live in as a parent. You know, we talk about hypervigilance in our children a lot, but parenting a child with FASD is like parenting on steroids, and you really have to bring your A game every single day. But it's supervision, I would say. Supervision, and predicting. If they're going into certain environments that might be exciting or overstimulating, have a plan B.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and just accept that you're going to drop the ball sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah. None of us are perfect. We're, however therapeutic we might like to be, we all have our own triggers as well, and recognizing that totally. Okay, so I think we've answered those. I'm just looking at the questions in the Q&A, and we've got quite a few, so I'll try and come on to those. Okay, somebody very quickly asking if there's a support group for parents with possible FASD. Absolutely. FASD Hub Scotland have a parent carer group, as I mentioned, and I'm sure we can put the link in to the chat for that. Anybody who has a child with a history of prenatal alcohol exposure can join that group. They don't need to have a diagnosis at all, and there's just over 300 people there, so there's lots of people with lots of different experiences and children of different ages as well in that group, and it's well moderated and supported by the Hub team, some of whom are here tonight. We've had a question about boundaries. How do you put boundaries in place to improve behaviour while trying to parent? I think we've answered that one really. Recently, sorry, I'm just reading these really quickly. Okay. Right, okay, so somebody asking, they've got a sibling group that they've recently adopted, and asking around, is there dysregulation often common around one particular parent? Jackie, maybe you'd like to answer that because you have a sibling group, and Barbara?
I don't have a sibling group actually. Do they mean dysregulation, you know, around them as parents?
Yeah, I think it says particularly struggling with one of the parents leaving the house and the wife looking after them. Is this dysregulation around one particular parent common? And I think they're quite new in their family structure, so it's maybe more just a general, like, I think it can be common. I think, you know,
yes,
one parent
I was going to say it can all sometimes depend on the child's what's happened to them in the past. You know, I've seen with foster children that they may favour my husband because they feel safer with him, or they also sometimes have a fear that if I went out of the house, that I may not come back. You know, I've had foster children be clinging on to me and not wanting me to go because they're frightened I'm not going to come back because they've had loss, you know, in their early years. So it can come from that, and it's just to help somebody in that situation. It's just helping with reassuring them that they're coming back all the time, having, you know, explaining to them all the time what's happening, so that they eventually will trust and gain trust in the carer that they will come back and they will look after them.
Yeah, and I don't think that this is necessarily specific around FASD, this question. I think that would be true of any child that's come through the care system. So they've experienced a disrupted attachment and they're trying to reattach, and they're looking for their primary carer, and you know, those things are going to happen. I guess it's around relationships you're then building, how you're reintegrating when you come back to the home, you know, doing things like having a picture on the wall, which is maybe, you know, if you've gone to work or you go into the shops, then you move your photograph to the shops or to the work, or, you know, so they've got a visual reminder of where everybody is. And then when you come back to the house, you move that photograph back to the family home again. A really practical suggestion, so that, you know, you, for some children, they could be developmentally younger. So it's that sort of, it drops off the high chair and it's like gone into oblivion, but you don't want them to feel that about you. Lindsay, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, you're reminding me of Harry Potter, and Mrs. Weasley had a big clock on the wall knowing where all her children were at any one time, when whether they were in mortal danger or not. So I love that image of having a little photo of where you are. I'm going to take that in my back pocket and use that for giving advice for people. Thank you. I've learned that, something from that. Thank you.
Well, we did used to use that in our house, so I know it works from a practical point of view. It was very useful at bedtime when everyone wasn't back home. So yeah, and where were they? Okay, great. We've got some question here that I would like to ask to Eleanor, which is around what support can LA's local authorities offer?
Well,
that's such a broad question, yeah, but let's try and keep it to FASD.
I think the question had come through saying, you know, if we are offered support, what do we ask for?
Sorry,
I think that in my experience, you might not necessarily be offered support. You're going to have to proactively seek that out. So if it's for adoptive parents, I guess at the point where your child or children are placed with you for adoption, the local authority should have an adoption support plan formulated, and they usually would stipulate that, you know, if needs change, then this can be reviewed and revisited. So you are entitled to that. You are entitled to request a post-adoption support review in the form of a discussion or a meeting to revisit, and it allows you to then update what is the new information, what are the characteristics that have now emerged for my child, what are the increased level of needs. Whether you have a diagnosis or you don't at that point, I guess that it is your role then as the parent or carer to flag up and kind of illustrate or lay out for the other professionals what are the needs, what are the vulnerabilities, what does that look like in day-to-day life. And that's really so that in order that hopefully the local authority can review that support plan and discuss what could help. I think in terms of looking for support in relation to diagnostic pathway, it might be about approaching the local authority to say that you have a number of characteristics about, you know, your child, a number of difficulties that have emerged. And so maybe it's about revisiting, looking back on the information gathering and the evidence that was recorded originally to help explore that. If your child already has a diagnosis, then I think it was touched on earlier, but you would want to speak to the local authority where you live about the right to your child having a full assessment of needs as a child with a disability, and yourselves as the carers, parents with the right to have an assessment, a carer's assessment for yourselves. And I think it was mentioned, I think Debbie had mentioned it earlier, even just kind of through that, maybe being able to access different financial supports, reconsideration of adoption allowance. It's something that can be asked about, and you can have that discussion also, but it might be about maybe other benefits and things that you can access, which can then help with a range of therapeutic support. I think that most local authorities, certainly in Scotland, would probably now be very much signposting to FASD Hub, given the range of supports as kind of outlined at the beginning of the session, because you guys are experts and have so much support and particularly understanding and empathy as experienced, lived experience and as carers themselves. But I think this is really about advocacy. Every situation is different. Everybody's situation is different. But in my experience, it's about really, and hopefully your adoption agency that you're linked with, if you have one, or your local authority will, you know, you'll have some link there that you can speak to, really describing your experience and the need for your social workers or the other professionals that might be involved, whether it's school, whether it's OT, anybody that has a real sense of your child also and the difficulties they have, to bring that all together and really push forward the need for that kind of full assessment and the need to look at supports.
Brilliant, thank you. Elsie, you can add something.
I am, yeah. Post-adoption support, I mean, certainly within my local authority, very much still deals with trauma and attachment. And the services that are offered are to do with trauma and attachment. So when you're approaching your local authority for support, do ask how much they know about FASD. I think that's changing now, but this child has a neurodivergence, and there will be an element of trauma. FASD itself is a form of pre-birth trauma. There will be an element of attachment. Their attachment is not going to be typical because their brain isn't typical, but things that just focus on trauma and attachment are not appropriate to children with FASD. They can be part of an overall package, but there needs to be more than that, I would say.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. Totally, thank you. Somebody was asking as well, we've touched on the fact that we can live in a constant state of hypervigilance, I think, as Elsa was describing, and it can be very exhausting as a parent and carer. I think all of us here that are parenting and caring would agree with that. And the question is, what support is out there? And I'm just going to bring that to Barbara so she can answer that, so it's not my voice.
I think I've also got a mute button today. So what support is there for hypervigilance with parents? I think the most important thing is recognising that is something that you need support with, and going and actually asking for that support. And whether it's you come to speak to people like us who've got a kind of shared experience, whether it's something you maybe need to seek support from GP, if maybe counselling, or maybe maybe you need to go and sort of seek support from somewhere else. I think opportunity for self-care is really important as well. Getting that little bit of time. They always say you go and have a bath. I hate baths. I would never suggest that. but find what works for you, and get a bit of time away, even 10 minutes in the day if you can, and get that bit of self-care and just help regulate yourself, because you need to be regulated so that you can co-regulate the person that you're supporting as well. So that would be my kind of top tip: seek support and self-care.
And also, as Eleanor said, getting a disability social worker and getting some support there, whether that is respite care or self-directed support, where you can actually pay for different activities or pay for somebody to come in and give you some respite. But there is that recourse as well.
Yeah, self-directed payments have been a step change for us in being able to employ somebody to go, and we call him his adventure helper, that's what he's called, and they go on adventures together once a week, but it's 3 hours that we've just got time to do other things. It doesn't mean that we're unfortunately not spending 3 hours in the bath eating chocolate or any of those things. It might just be clearing the bedroom floor is what I did this week, but actually that was self-care for me, because every time I walk in my bedroom I'm not feeling stressed by what's happening on my bedroom floor. So yeah, but yeah, definitely look into those things, and a disability social worker can be really beneficial. Most areas you're only able to get one though if there is a diagnosis in place, so it's worth remembering that. So we've got just over 10 minutes or just under 10 minutes remaining, so I'm just really conscious of the time, and I know we probably could go on a lot longer this evening, but I want to try and keep to time. So I've got 3 questions that I'd shared with my panel members prior to us starting this evening that we said we would finish with, and the first one is, what would be the one piece of advice you would give to a prospective adopter in relation to parenting someone with FASD? So if I could just ask each of you in turn to answer that question, that would be great. Maybe start with Barbara, if that's okay.
Yeah, my one piece of advice to a prospective adopter was, do not be afraid. There are challenges, there's a lot of unknowns, but it's not all bad. There's a lot of, our children are wonderful, they can achieve so much with the right support. Would I go back and adopt another child with FASD? Yes, I would. But that's because even though it's a really challenging journey, there are rewards in there as well. And as long as you've got the right support around you, then great things can happen. So do not be afraid is my advice.
Jackie?
I would just add on to what Barbara says, create a good support network around you, whether that's friends, family, you know, going out and looking for a support group like the FASD Hub or local groups. There's, I think, as a result of COVID, there's a lot of well-being networks starting up. Some schools actually are setting up their own support groups to help, you know, not only children with FASD, but other neurodivergent conditions as well. So that just a really good support network.
Brilliant, thank you. And Debbie?
Well, I was actually going to go support as well. I think one of the things to say is a really good support network. Sometimes friends and family, when they see the behaviours, don't always get it. So I think I would say that can happen, in which case when you find support groups like FASD, you find people who do get it, and that will become very, very important to you, because when you try to explain to someone who doesn't get it, they literally can't take it on board. So when you have that kind of support from people who do understand, who do get it, but just not to be afraid of that, but to be aware that sometimes the people who you thought would be able to support you, sometimes they can't, but there is always other support out there. And it is like finding your tribe, and it's really good. And the self-care, that's the other thing that I would add in, get into the habit of creating moments of self-care, because it can take over. So it's just be careful and get those two things, support and self-care.
Brilliant, thank you. Elsa?
Oh, there's a million things going through my head. I would say from a practical point of view, read. Speak to people with lived experience, but lived positive experience or realistic experience, because if you go onto Facebook groups, some are really supportive, but some people only post when they're having a hellish time. So be careful what you read. It's like the FASD equivalent of consulting Dr. Google. And the other thing I would say is remember you are you outside it all, because FASD can become all-consuming. Remember that you were you before you adopted a child with FASD, and you are still you now. And find something that connects you with you, if that doesn't sound too dippy hippie, whether that is crafting or writing or running or singing, whatever. Just keep a sense of yourself.
Yeah, great, thank you. Lindsay?
I think the bit that I felt made a big difference to one family I was involved with who had adopted a child with FASD was when they actually lived through the idea which Barbara actually talked about at the beginning, which was every day is a new day. And they left the day that had happened before at the end of the day and woke up the next morning, and the child didn't remember what had gone on the day before. And even though it had been a disastrous day in that circumstance, you know, they didn't remember. And as long as the parents remembered that as well, they moved on and accepted and built, you know, such pride and confidence in their parenting and in the child. So that's the one thing that I would suggest. Every day is a new day. It works for parents of every child, to be honest, but it's hard to do at times because you get caught up with what brings you down when you're parenting. But that's one of the things that I think we can all always remember.
Thank you, that's lovely. Eleanor?
So my one piece of advice for prospective adopters who are considering the possibility of parenting a child with FASD, many people that might have joined the webinar tonight are maybe thinking, you know, could we do this? Is this something we can do? And I think that I was thinking about, you know, if you're in the process to adopt, your preparation to adopt training will have definitely hoped to prepare you for uncertainty for, a big level of uncertainty in adoption, as with many factors. But specifically with FASD, I think it's about knowledge and empowerment. So really just similar to what Ailsa said, read, research, knowledge is kind of power in this situation. If you can arm yourself with as much knowledge as possible about FASD, then in terms of making those decisions around, can we do this? And could we consider a child with FASD or with a high risk of that, then that's going to stand you in good stead. And that empowerment really just is also about how you then take that forward and advocating for your child, getting the school on board, being able to, to get other professionals on board to understand, I guess, that child at the centre, because that really came out in the animation. The child wants you just to see them. So as a prospective adopter coming to adoption looking for a family, then there's still a child there at the centre, and that's really the bit to really take home and remember.
Absolutely, that's lovely, thank you. And I think we've got 1 minute left, so I am going to skip our second question, go straight to our third, directly to the parents, and ask them, so finally, ending on a positive this evening, what is the best thing about your child? What is their superpower? Debbie, would you like to kick us off?
Oh, my boy is incredibly creative, and he is so funny, and what a fabulous storyteller. I'm sure he'll be a writer in the future.
That's lovely. Jackie?
Mine is incredibly sporty. He's just been chosen for the competition squad in his taekwondo group. So he is absolutely delighted with himself.
Brilliant, well done to him. Ailsa?
On a practical level, he could engineer anything. But on a personal level, his capacity to love is absolutely unparalleled. He is just the most loving, kind, beautiful soul.
That's really nice. And Barbara?
My boy, it's just, we say it to him all the time, he's got such a kind heart, and he's just so kind and caring and generous and loving as well. So his kind heart is definitely his superpower.
Thank you so much for everybody joining us this evening. I hope as we end this session, you can go away with those memories of the superpowers that are represented by the 4 young people here this evening and their parents that have spoken about them just then. A thank you to all of the panel, to Lindsay and Eleanor for bringing their professional expertise, and to Ailsa for bringing that dual expertise of both as a carer, parent, and also as an educator, and to Jackie and Debbie and Barbara for bringing their parenting knowledge and expertise as well. Thank you very much, everybody. It's the end of our webinar here this evening. Some lovely comments coming in there. If you want to know more about FASD, then please look up FASD Hub Scotland. You'll find us through the Adoption UK website. You can visit us at www.fasdhub.scot to find us easily. We have a YouTube channel where this video will be placed up probably sometime next week, and you'll find lots of other resources there and videos and recordings from previous webinars that we've done over a number of years now. You'll also find there the FASD Makes Me Me animation, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we're on all of those regularly every day of the week. You can contact us through our helpline, which is open Tuesday to Friday, 10 AM to 2:30 PM. And you can also email us at fasdhub.scotland@adoptionuk.org.uk.